Welcome back, Dolphins. This is going to be a video basically talking about, has the Super Bowl window closed? I'm making this on the eve of the Super Bowl, and a lot of people are probably wondering, has the Super Bowl window closed? And I'm going to tell you right now, there's probably a 1% chance that we can turn this around. And the way that we can do that is something that has never happened in the Chris Grier tenure or the Mike McDaniel tenure, but mostly Chris Grier. The Super Bowl window is still kind of open, and the reason why I say that, not this year. This year, I do not think that this coming year, do not think that we have, a shot. I think we can win a playoff game, but do not think we have a shot at winning the Super Bowl. But the reason why I say that is because in 2026, we have to understand that a lot of people's contracts are going to be cuttable, like Tyreek Hill and Teron Armstead and even Tua. Honestly, most of these high-end maximum contract players are going to be cuttable at that year. And the Dolphins will free up so much cap space. But it's depending on what they do this year. I really hope that this year that Stephen Ross does not allow them to do the paycheck cutting and moving and all that stuff, because it keeps destroying the next year. What needs to happen this year is basically the key to the coming years. And why I say that is because, obviously, personally, I would sign Jalen Phillips to an extension. Personally, I would just get that done. That's something that I think needs to get done in this offseason, or in this season. The first couple games, if he starts playing well, sign him to an extension so we don't wait till he hits free agency. But like I said, Bradley Chubb, Tyreek Hill, Teron Armstead, Jalen Ramsey, basically the premier players that take up the most contract space, they are all going to be cuttable in 2026. So the point of this video is that what we need to do is we need to study the Super Bowl. We need to look, obviously, obviously the Kansas City Chiefs have a all-world quarterback. That's hard to replicate. You can't really do that. But you need to take a look at the Philadelphia Eagles and how you can make your Super Bowl window open back up. And how you do that is by doing exactly what they did. This year, the years that we've had, the problem with Chris Grier is that a lot of our draft picks he's missed on, and we've had to sign free agents for these crazy deals. And what the Eagles have done consistently is they've hit on most of their draft picks, and then they just fill the holes with the free agents. That's the philosophy of what Super Bowl teams do. They hit on most of their draft picks, and then they fill the holes with free agents. So, like, for instance, when you look at Jalen Hurts, most of the offensive line was drafted. Jalen Hurts was drafted. Devontae Smith was drafted. All these players were basically drafted. The only ones that you filled in was Saquon Barkley and A.J. Brown, which is perfect key thing to it. When you have an offensive line that's mostly drafted, you're going to have much more success, because the reason behind that is that then you just have to fill certain holes. Right now, we've missed on most of our offensive line and draft picks, and the best one that we had, we let walk in free agency. That's the biggest problem here. So seeing the Philadelphia Eagles, you need to understand that hitting on draft picks is so key. You're not taking project players. When we look back at the drafts that Chris Grier has had, he's gotten some players, but when you look back, it's that rebuild year that we take a step back to that kind of destroyed this, up-and-coming Super Bowl team because of what he drafted. We got to remember, when we went back to that draft, that late first-round pick on Noah Igbenogany, which was a surprise to everybody. And you take a surprise because of certain talents and traits. Nobody understood why we took Noah. Every single person in that draft wanted us to get Jonathan Taylor with that pick. And again, you look back at this draft, if you had Jonathan Taylor, you have a franchise running back that would have cleared up so much possibilities in your team, instead of Noah Igbenogany that basically turned out to be one of the worst picks the Dolphins have ever had. Then you hit to Liam Eichenberg, where you trade up to get him. And what ends up happening is you miss on like Creed Humphreys and Azure K. I think he's a free agent. What's his name from the Cowboys? Awuzure K, or I forgot his name. The defensive tackle that has been a stud for years. You missed on him. There was so many draft picks that you missed on, and it's not just to get a player. It's to get a really bad player that does not contribute at all to the team. You look at Jalen Waddle, which, I still like the Jalen Waddle pick. I think it was a good pick, but we were at 3 at that point. Instead of doing all this moving around and all of that finagling, we used those to get Waddle and Jalen Phillips. We could have just stayed put and gotten Jamar Chase. Who else would it be? I mean, yeah, these are things that we lost a 3rd round, and then Bradley Chubb cost us a 1st round pick. Tampering with Tampa Bay cost us a 1st round pick. A lot of these things that if we just stopped doing all the finagling and these different little surprise moves and all that stuff, we would have had a bunch of draft picks, and we would have picked the right players that would have built this franchise and built this rebuild right, including Tua. And Tua was the pick at that time. That was not a bad pick. That was the pick at the time. Justin Herbert, I don't care what anybody says. Justin Herbert, he just has a rocket for an arm. That's all that really happens. He gets destroyed every time he goes to the playoffs. I don't understand what this Justin Herbert thing is. Tua was the pick. But a lot of these picks, they've whiffed on over and over again. And what ends up happening is you whiff on these picks, and then you have to end up signing a freaking Jalen Ramsey, or you have to sign a Tyreek Hill, or you have to sign a lot of these players instead of having this rebuild right. Instead of getting Tyreek Hill, if you had just gotten Jamar Chase, you would have been fine. I think we did a lot of the finessing so much because we were just trying to change the trajectory, but sometimes you have to have confidence and patience in yourself. Again, if we did not try and get Tyreek Hill, that first draft of Mike McDaniel, we would have had a 1st round pick, and we would have had Jamar Chase already on the roster. You know what I'm saying? So if you did that, Jalen Phillips, yeah, he's great, but he's constantly injured. You know what I'm saying? It's still determined to see if Jalen Phillips can stay on the field. He's kind of like Tua. He gets injured every single year for season-ending injuries. So the thing is if you just stayed put, you already had an elite receiver on your team. You wouldn't even need Tyreek Hill. So that would have been another 1st and 2nd and I think a 4th that you would have had in a draft. These are things that if you just stopped overcomplicating things and trying to outsmart everybody and just doing things right, you would have gotten all the players that you needed to have this successful rebuild. But instead, what Chris Grier has done is he's whiffed on most of his draft picks and basically had to fill everything with free agency, which has put us in cap hell right now because, again, you had to sign these maximum players to maximum deals, and, unfortunately, you can't really develop anything from them because you're paying 4 or 5 players $100 million, takes up all of your cap. This is why the Super Bowl window, this year we're not going to do it, but 2025, this coming year with the draft, which again, if you watch my channel, we're going to go over a lot of the draft picks that we can get. If we choose right in the draft and we get at least 3 valuable players that contribute immediately, if we can do that, 2026, all of these players can be cut, and the cap space will shoot through the roof for the Miami Dolphins, and we can do this right. Now, that depends on the coach, of course. We don't know if we're going to have Mike McDaniel after this year. If he's successful, sure, I say keep him. If they learn from their mistakes, sure, I say keep him. Everybody deserves a chance if they're going to decide to go against what they have been doing. But you look at the Super Bowl, and you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, and that's the philosophy that we need to have. If you look at my first mock draft, defensive tackle, offensive line in the first 2 rounds, that's what needs to happen this year. A lot of people have us taking Malachi Starks and all that stuff. That's not the pick. The pick is defensive line and offensive linemen. I don't care what anybody says. The philosophy of the Dolphins continually trying to get skill players instead of building the bricks to the house, it's falling apart, and even Jesus says, build your house on rock. We've built our house on sand, on these skill players. So again, 2025 is the key year. You have some players. You have Jordan Brooks. You have Sealer. You have, I would say just sign back Jalen Phillips. You have Chop Robinson. You have Austin Jackson. You have Patrick Paul, whatever offensive lineman. You have Aaron Brewer. You have Waddle. You already have the pieces that you need. But in order to take that next step, you need to correct what you've been doing. And these drafts, this next draft of this year and even 2026 needs to continually be just shooting for offensive line and defensive line, building these trenches. People wanted to fire Nick Sirianni. He has the greatest philosophy. O-line, D-line. O-line, D-line. That's what he does continually in the draft. So even if he misses, which he really doesn't on these guys, even if he misses, you've drafted so many of these players that most of them are going to hit. So you have a filled up roster, and then you just plug the holes with whatever else you need. That's a successful rebuild. That's what the Eagles did. The Eagles had a successful turnaround. But what we've done is we've focused on skill players. 2025 is going to be the pivotal year, depending on, what Mike McDaniel does, even if we have a different coach. The thing is this year, the draft needs to hit. You need to hit. And there's so many stud players in this draft that if you don't hit, I don't know what to tell you. Defensive line and offensive line in this draft, the first 2 rounds, are loaded. They have a bunch of players. So if you don't hit in this draft, that's going to be the key in the lock. You know what I'm saying? The key to turning this thing around is drafting right, drafting the trenches, and doing enough to get to the playoffs so that next year you can cut every single player that completely just took over the cap space of this team and build again patiently. I don't need to sit here and need to go to the Super Bowl. I want to, but I want to do it right. And how you can do that is these next 2 years are pivotal to open the Super Bowl window back up and be able to play for a Super Bowl, building it right. Understanding that the way that you built it with all these big name skill players wasn't right. You need to use the draft, hit on most of your players, cut most of the players that just took up way too much cap space, and build through the young people and be able to just fill in some of the roster spots, but not put yourself in cap hell in order to do that. If you look at Philadelphia, they're in the Super Bowl right now, and I think they're top 15 with cap space this offseason because they don't do what the Dolphins do. They don't just bring in big-name players for no apparent reason that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They don't do that. They build through the draft, and that's what the Dolphins need to do. 2025 is pivotal to open the Super Bowl window back up, build this thing right, and, take it from there. But, again, 2026 is going to be key because I'm telling you right now, all of these $100 million players, they all have an out in 2026, which was kind of smart by Greer. They all have an out, but he needs to learn from his ways. Offensive line, defensive line, build through the trenches and build this team right so that we can compete again for Super Bowls. Because when you look at the NFL, the turnarounds are massively quick. Like you look at Detroit, you look at the LA Rams, you can turn a franchise around real quick. But again, you look at all of these franchises, what do they have? They've built through the trenches. Detroit Lions took Penei Sewell when Miami should have taken that. The Rams have built a successful offensive line around Matthew Stafford. This is the key. You have to understand all of these teams. The quick turnaround is because they've built through the trenches, and that's what Miami needs to do. And if they do that successfully this year, they will turn this franchise right around, 100%. I don't have any doubt about that. If they can clear up the cap space, which we'll go over that in a later video, you can turn this franchise around.